pretty exciting day for all of us at TechCrunch, having Eric Schmidt here with us on stage. Hi, Eric.
And thank you for having my most recent book here, Now in China.
And I love, it's appropriately titled How Google Works. For anybody.
As opposed to How Alphabet Works.
Right, exactly. I would think that How Google Works book would be a little bit larger than this one. There's a lot to talk about.
I know. Well, it had to be consumable.
So, we were talking a little bit before we walked up on stage here, and I asked you how often you're in China, and you're in China at least once a year.
Yeah, and I've been coming here for many years. My first visit was more than 20 years ago, and the sort of rate of transformation is just hard to describe. And since you see it episodically, you see the transformation every time you're here.
So, you were saying back in 1995, it was just a different landscape. The cityscape was different. The amount of vehicles were different. The streets were different. As far as technology goes, what stands out to you as, let's say in the last 2 decades, the most important transformation in China, mainland China?
When I first came here, Sun had a subsidiary that was selling Sun computers to the universities here, including the Tsinghua. And my first experiences were with Tsinghua University doing research on Sun computers. And the internet had just arrived. By far the biggest transformation of the country has been the rise of mobile mobility. And now the Chinese mobile companies, sort of roughly 4 companies, are, by any measure, the largest network, the largest number of users, the largest service providers. And when they talk about the number of customers they have, it's like 1 billion customers. And they talk about covering the entire country all the way to the mountains and so forth and so on. And the country was relatively slow to issue LTE licenses, but now quickly LTE has taken over, and the benefits of it is enormous.
When I landed here in Beijing yesterday, coming from San Francisco in the US, what services are going to work that we use regularly, what services don't work, and what are some of the workarounds for us to do our job. The situation with Google has obviously changed over the last 6 years. Can you tell us any more about what Google is working on in China to become more of a search presence than it has decided not to be in the last 6 years?
You know, it's interesting that Google never left China, and we continue to have more than 500 employees here. There's lots of partners, huge Android presence.
You have offices in Beijing and Shanghai.
And also in Greater China, in Taiwan and Hong Kong. And much of the servers are done outside of Hong Kong. So from our perspective, we very much like to serve all of China. And we continue to sort of chat with the government about all of this.
Is that why you're here this week?
We're always talking to the government. They've also visited us in California as well. And so that's one of the reasons, but not the only reason. What's interesting to me about China is the level of entrepreneurialism, which of course this conference represents, is probably the highest, or very close to the highest in the world. If you look at where do you get the kind of diversity of innovation, you get it in Silicon Valley, you get it a little bit in Boston, you get it in Tel Aviv, and you get it in Beijing, Shanghai. And I, along with many other people, thought that the level of innovation and science and so forth here would take much longer to achieve. So just as impressive as the shift from bicycles, which were on the first ring road and now it's full of cars, the other shift has been the rise in investment in educational systems here at the university level. And what I understand is that the Chinese government is pouring money into high-end research universities in computer science, engineering, genetics, this sort of hardcore stuff. And that bodes very well for the country.
In the last 5 years, the concept of mobile first has really changed. Even just 5 years ago, there the folks that were saying, well, it won't be long before that's all we're doing. And a lot of us thought, everything is so clunky on mobile, it's so much harder to do what you need to do. That's no longer the case. What do you see changing in that same vein over the next 5 to 10 years?
It's worth actually thinking, when was it that when your smartphone took over your life? And I'll give you an example. Watch a movie from 2007, 2008, before the iPhone was introduced. And they'll be referring to things called PDAs, and they might refer to a BlackBerry and things like that. But with the arrival of the iPhone, and shortly thereafter, Android One and its successors, we've seen billions of people almost 2 billion people using smartphones of one kind or another. And with the second version of iOS, I was on the Apple board at the time, the adoption of interfaces which allow for app stores and so forth, which led to another wave of startups. And again, here in China, the average Chinese person doesn't really remember a time before they had access to WeChat. And of course, before that, they had something called Weibo, but they didn't remember before they had that. So when these network-based systems hit, they hit in a broad level, and they really change society. The next one, of course, is the various on-demand services. In China, there's a leader, two companies just merged called Didi, and of course there's Uber in the rest of the world, Uber here as well. We saw driving around, we saw the Amazon delivery carts, the little mopeds, things like that. So it's happening very quickly. It's important to remember that 10 years ago, this was largely an unbanked place, and that everybody had to do business by wiring money. Today they have the equivalent of Alipay and these sorts of things, all indexed by their WeChat accounts.
And yeah, what are your thoughts on the concept of WeChat and other services that want to be, it starts as a messenger, but it's really a way to do all sorts of transactions, business, shopping, the whole nine within that messaging app?
Well, if you look at China and you ask, what are some of the things that China has invented that are likely to export out of China and have a big impact? One of the most obvious is the success of the drone company DJI, which I think is a well understood, hugely successful startup. Google has recently done a deal with Huawei for the latest Nexus 6, and Huawei, after many years, has really come out with an extraordinary set of mobile phones in the product line, and I'm hearing anecdotally more and more of that. So those are some examples. I think on the softer side, WeChat is the most interesting because it solves simultaneously many problems that consumers have. And one of the questions I always ask is, why did that product not get invented anywhere else? And I think the answer has to do with the maturity of the banking system, the identification system, the way distribution worked, and that the integrated services of WeChat were not as important, for example, in the US, but they were critically important here, so they were invented here. And I think it's an open question whether those will export, and I think in one form or another they will.
You mentioned DJI. I know that you own your own drone enthusiast, if you will, flight in general enthusiast. What are your thoughts on drone-based deliveries and the concept that it won't be long before, once there are FAA regulations and other regulations to sort out around the world, that's a viable way to do business and delivery?
Well, it makes sense in cities that the only space that's not crowded is above you. And many of you, I suspect, have spent a fair amount of time in the Asian cities. And with the enormous amount of movement from rural to urban, the infrastructure in these cities is not kept up. And in the United States and Europe, people complain about this, but you see it in the construction of these cities, in crowded, metering of transport and so forth and so on. So I think we will clearly see various forms of autonomous delivery and eventually human delivery, that is literally human transportation.
Via drone?
Via the equivalent of drones as the technology gets better. And one of the ways to think about it is that in our industry as a whole, the biggest news is around machine learning. And in computer science, the most important thing that has occurred is the development of vision systems that are better than humans. So it is an absolute fact that computers can now see better than humans can. And so many things which are vision intensive are likely to be computer assisted or computer replaced. The most obvious being cars. Because cars is largely a vision problem, seeing and avoiding, seeing and turning. I want to go here, I want to go there. All of that should be automated. Google, of course, has a project there, but you can imagine eventually the drone will be automated as well for the same purpose.
So this whole idea, certainly in Silicon Valley, people get very excited when they see one of the Google cars driving down the highway with well, there has to be somebody behind the wheel, but basically driving itself. Is the idea of autonomous cars on land, on the earth, sort of a stopgap solution before we all just rise above?
Well, the helicopter problem, gyrocopter problem, is really a power-to-weight ratio problem. And there are many, many people who believe that in our lifetimes there will be very inexpensive, very powerful lift systems that we use various forms of copper and battery systems, and the batteries are getting better. I think that's a matter of conjecture. I suspect it's true. Self-driving cars are technically possible now, and there are all sorts of interesting problems. A typical example is I've been in them, and they are fantastic, and they drive very well, and they're very, very safe. They also drive at the speed limit. So I don't know about you all, but I find myself on the freeway, and I always look around, and I realize that I'm driving a little bit faster than the speed limit, and I'm in the slow lane. So how do you handle that from a regulatory perspective? Do you have a button that says, take me faster than the speed limit, is that legal? Well, the speed limit is binding, it's not optional. So those are the kinds of issues that have to get resolved before you'll see this problem.
I know 5 years ago, the conversation was so much about how is mobile going to become a solution that we can all use, and how can we use the computer here in our pockets as our personal.
Yeah, I think of it as a supercomputer. It's literally a supercomputer. The computation capability of this next generation with Snapdragon chips and the iPhone proprietary chips rivals any supercomputer that we had 10 years ago. It's extraordinary.
I know Google is one of many companies that's heavily invested in machine learning, and the idea that your computer can know more about you over time based on your habits, based on the things that you do, the people you talk to, the things that you search for. Right now, I do a lot of, well, let's compare Siri to Google Now when I ask a query. And Google Now is almost always across the board, just able to understand my language better. But that's really just the first step. Can you understand what I'm saying in this particular language? What can we look forward to, or what are you looking forward to, that conceptually maybe we haven't even grasped yet about machine learning?
Well, I think it's, today when you use Google Translate, you're using machine learning from Google, and it does not use a dictionary. It uses a mathematical technique called deep learning, where it understands the concept, basically the structure of the phonemes, and translates them into chunks. The chunks are then assembled into words, into sentences, and then they're translated into impossibly interestingly different paragraphs in the other language. And we have done demos where you can actually do this in real time. You can actually talk into your phone and it comes out in another language. So I think that problem is a pretty well understood problem. And I think in the next 5 or 10 years, people will have forgotten how to get problems in those areas. But that is an extraordinary technological feat. The question is, how much farther do you go from that sort of relatively straightforward translation to real understanding? And my argument would be that computers are very good at rote pattern recognition. So we could probably mimic human behavior if it's routine and predictable and
not riddled with sarcasm.
Yeah, sort of normal things. So sitting there and monitoring something, or keeping your eye on something, or giving you an alert for something, or watching for a pattern. It becomes more and more speculative the farther you go down. Now, we're not talking about consciousness in the air, we're not talking about writing Shakespeare, but there are demonstrations today in the industry where computers can write reasonably good college-level papers. Right? So that's an example where it's almost human. In the industry, there's a large debate as to how much farther to go. Many people I know believe that in 15 or 20 years, it will be possible to have cognition at the level of real cognitive thought on a human basis. But I would argue that that's speculation at this point. We don't know. It's possible, it's also possible. It will hit other roadblocks.
These are the sorts of things that scare people. You say, well,
but can I say why you shouldn't be scared?
Yes.
It's important to remember that our job is to make people smarter, and Google makes you smarter because it's this enormous repository of fact and the world, right? In the same sense that Facebook and Twitter and all the other services that we use in the US make people smarter, as WeChat makes humans here smarter. So it's not unreasonable to want those computers to be better, right? We talk about going from querying to making suggestions, right? So in my case, Eric, you were here 2 years ago. You said the following things. You were wrong. Please don't say that again. That would be very helpful if the computer said that to me, right? Rather than, and it would be routine. And all of us would use that service if it were under our control and free.
You mentioned that computers can make us all smarter, but Going back to the fear element, somebody hears, well, that computer can write a fairly decent college essay. People go, ooh, now we won't know if the human really wrote it or not. I noticed that my Uber drivers more and more in San Francisco don't actually know the city at all because they can rely on maps and they can see where traffic congestion is and a machine is telling them turn left, turn right, and that works most of the time. But there are certain things that don't quite translate yet, and I wonder how much having technology as a crutch sometimes keeps us from doing some of the hard things that we used to do as humans.
The problem I have with that argument is that when I was 13 years old, I grew up in Virginia, and I had an assignment. I had to memorize the names of the counties and the capitals of the counties of each of the counties that were in Virginia. And after some labor, I managed to do this. Now today, I would say to a faculty member, why do I have to do this? I have Google, I can use Google Maps. This is a waste of my time. And I'm sure she'd hit me around or something as a 13-year-old. So my point here is, some of these conventions which we cherish might be a waste of our time. Right? The fact of the matter is computers are better at remembering rote knowledge. And what I would argue is that this puts more emphasis and more pressure on education. And speaking about China, there's a tradition here of education and a commitment to education which is very important. All right? And the secret to China's success going forward will be a commitment to education and getting people as educated as possible. 100 years ago in America, there was a revolutionary movement and they agreed to have essentially free high school, which was a revolutionary idea at the time. And all of the Americans I know benefited from something broad available through high school public education. And then in California, they had a history of free college education for a long time. Those are important government programs because they brought sort of an agrarian population into sort of a relatively well-educated one. We need the same initiatives now for this next level. It's not going to be good enough to be able to memorize everything. You're going to have to actually, in order to compete, in order to add value, you're going to have to be able to actually provide amazing services, really think, and be well educated. So it is actually true that the computerization does force people to be better educated. And it's important to know that this is not a new phenomenon. 20 or 30 years ago, robots showed up in manufacturing and displaced jobs. Today, the people who work with robots are much higher paid than the people whose jobs were replaced by robots.
Talking about education, if I could ask you to look into your crystal ball and predict what the university system would look like in another decade, maybe 20 years, does it resemble today at all?
I think it's important to remember that residential universities around the world are going to only become more valuable. And the value of the residential experience, the value of the grouping together, the selection bias, and so forth that goes on in universities will only be more valuable in a globalized, knowledge-intensive world. The thing that is completely new is the advent of essentially automated distance learning.
Right.
And the ability to, in one form or another, learn when you're in an isolated environment and so forth. So going back to sort of what are the greatest achievements in the last 20 years, I would argue that the broadest achievement of humanity in a period of relative prosperity has been the lifting of 2 billion people from extreme poverty to low middle class. Right? And that's basically because of globalization. And globalization has brought them much higher quality of life, a much safer environment, and so forth. The next group will be because of mobile connectivity. And if you forecast the current trends, another 3-4 billion people will get connected in the next 5 to 10 years. The majority of these are not connected to the network today. Today we're at on the order of 3.5, 3 billion, depending on the numbers we use. So slightly less than 50%. When a majority, say 6 out of 7 billion or 7 out of 8 billion, depending on what it occurs in that count, that's an amazing achievement in terms of their access to information, to security, for entertainment, and for markets. That's the great quest, right? We forget, we're so focused on ourselves in our own elite worlds. We forget that the majority of people live in countries that do not have the kind of bandwidth and global opportunities that the Chinese have, let alone the Americans.
Back in August, one of my coworkers surprised me and said, "Wait, Google just changed its name to Alphabet? What?" And we all went, "That's no." That's of course the bigger story was that a parent company was created, and you're executive chairman of that new parent company, Alphabet, and that it's almost as if you can think of Google splitting itself into a variety of smaller companies to run more efficiently than one big company that ran less efficiently. Is that the sort of direction that large companies like Google that want to do a variety of things just have to do in order to grow in a smart way?
Every company of scale faces this question of diversification. As far as I know, Google is the only company that's done it at this level of intensity. Pretty much everybody else creates a division to this and a division to that. And the problem with this is that they're still part of one mothership, they're still codependent, they're still, all sorts of funny relationships. So in our case, we decided to take a position that these are independent companies that are run by CEOs, they have clear objectives, they're a very small holding company, which I'm a member of, and they're sort of on their own. And we think it's both better from a financial perspective, but the real benefit is now you've got strong leaders, men and women, who are heavily incented to run these businesses in fast-growing markets that we care about. The first one that we aim to announce is in the life science area, where we think there's tremendous opportunities. And we haven't announced others, but you can imagine ones in the other aspects of Google, in connectivity and transportation and things like that.
One last question before we give the stage up to the next presenter. We passed along, at TechCrunch, we passed along a story from the Wall Street Journal last week, talking about the idea of Chrome OS and Android becoming one. Anybody who's used Chrome OS on a Chromebook can think of it in many ways as sort of like a desktop app experience. Any truth to that?
We have talked about a lot about the merger of these, and there are essentially three different worlds, right? There's the Android Java application environment, there's a Chrome OS environment, and then there's an HTML5 environment, which is how the web expresses itself. And the technology has moved forward to the point where it's possible to wrap one into the other. So it's possible, for example, to take HTML5 apps and wrap them into Android apps, and similarly. So I think that the distinction